My father's cabin in the woods burned down. We found something strange in the ruins. So my father used to own a cabin. In fact, he used to own a lot of different properties, which I suppose is just a roundabout way of saying that we grew up with money. Where things get a bit complicated is how he actually made that money. The line that he constantly fed us was that he was an accountant running his own firm in an office in the city. Long hours, lots of business trips. We never saw him much, and whenever we did, he always seemed tired, his eyes perpetually bloodshot, as if he were always trying to force them to stay open. He was sent off to prison right after I'd finished my first year of college. The sentence? 15 years for wasting hundreds of millions of dollars for numerous cartels. 2 weeks after he'd been booked, my mother committed suicide. As it turns out, she'd been helping him out through the entire thing and was facing some time herself. I guess she didn't want to deal with all that and took the drastic way out. A few months later, the government had seized pretty much all his property, all of it, except for that cabin in the woods. It took a long time for me to feel normal again, but eventually, I managed it. Went back to school and graduated with a good enough GPA, which allowed me to snag some shitty office job a few months later. But it was enough to pay the bills. Fast forward about another year, and I've basically scrubbed that entire sequence of events out of my brain. It took a little bit of therapy, a lot of psychedelics, but I finally did it, to the point where I was comfortable enough to go back to that cabin, the one place where I'd see my father for more than a few weeks at a time during our summer trips. I decided to take along 3 of my friends from uni: Jack, Pedro, Randy. We drove down there at the beginning of May. The road leading to the cabin hadn't been maintained at all, and as a result, it had become borderline undrivable. I decided to save my vehicle the stress and parked in a nearby lot, leaving us about a 1.5-mile trek through the woods, which really wasn't so bad. Our time in the cabin was pretty much spent getting drunk and stoned, and by the third night we had completely run out of food. We decided to take the 30-minute walk over to the nearest rest stop, where I knew that there was a 24/7 diner. So we go there, eat our meals, and on the way back we notice a burning smell in the woods, as if there was a bonfire raging about nearby. Of course, that was a bit strange, given that it was around 2 a.m. But we didn't think too much of it at the time, and we kept walking. It was only when the smell continued to grow stronger as we got closer to the cabin that we understood something was very wrong. Soon, it had become suffocating, and we could see the night sky tinged with orange in the near distance. I felt my heart drop into my stomach, and immediately I was sprinting, my worst fear realized as I reached the clearing where the cabin was located. Completely up in flames, plumes of dark smoke blending in with the night. It was a mix of different emotions that hit me all at once, the combination of them creating a sense of dread so deep I hadn't thought it possible. After reeling myself in, I called 911, with the operator telling me that the fire department would be on their way, but wouldn't be able to reach us for at least 30 minutes. The 4 of us walked away from the cabin in silence, getting far enough so that the smoke was no longer scratching at our throats. Around 10 minutes later, we noticed that the orange tinge in the sky had suddenly disappeared. And I mean suddenly. Like, gone in a single blink. I thought I might have been hallucinating, but it was clear from their expressions that my friends were seeing something similar. Cautiously, we started making our way back towards the cabin, noticing that the smoke was no longer heavy in the air, having cleared up considerably. Once we reached the clearing, it had disappeared altogether. I looked ahead, my brain working overtime to comprehend the sight before me. The cabin was no longer on fire, burnt to a crisp, sure. But the raging, overwhelming flames that had been consuming it just minutes prior had somehow completely fizzled out. The 4 of us looked between each other, as if to confirm we were all still seeing the same thing. Using the flashlight on my phone to survey the damage, I found pretty much what I'd expected. Complete destruction. Absolutely zero hope of recovering anything. I started taking some deep breaths, trying to calm myself down when I heard Pedro yelling out from the other side. Guys, where the fuck did this thing come from? We all walked over to him. Nestled in the debris was the corpse of something. A monstrosity. It was about the size of a bear, with the sections of its body that weren't burnt, showing pale, clammy skin with deep cuts etched throughout it, in what looked to be some kind of crude pattern. Its head had been smashed in, leaving nothing but an abnormally wide bottom jaw which was still bearing long black teeth. It had an uncountable number of long, thick arms that it was using to hold something that resembled a human infant. One that appeared to be completely unscathed, devoid of any burn marks. The longer I stared at it, the more that I was convinced I could see it breathing. It was a bizarre enough sight to put us into a near trance. What eventually snapped us out of it was the chanting. It was barely noticeable at first, slowly escalating in pitch until it was clear that there were several human voices shouting in unison. Their tones were animalistic, their words strung together with just the bare beginnings of a rhythm. It sounded like they were speaking English, though I could hardly make out anything they were saying. The strangest part, though, was how quickly it was getting closer to us. Definitely not a walking pace. It was more like a sprint. The four of us shared a quick glance between each other, and immediately there was an understanding. We ran like bats out of hell, tripping over branches, our own feet. But eventually, we reached my car, all of us scrambling to pile into it. As I was fumbling for my keys, the chanting had become deafening, to a point that hardly made sense. It sounded as if there were speakers lined up in a circle around us, all blasting that horrible noise. And the second that I had put the keys into the ignition, things went silent. I found myself holding my breath as I looked up, my eyes slowly adjusting to the darkness until what I was seeing was unmistakable. Several figures standing completely still at the edge of the woods, all human-shaped but far too large to be people. All the air being held in my lungs flooded out with one big exhale, and I slammed the vehicle into drive and took a sharp turn before speeding the hell out of there, refusing to look in the rear view until we had made it into the highway. I drove until I had reached the rest stop, which was now hosting an absurd number of police cars. I parked, got out, and approached one of the cops, asking if they were here because of the fire. The cop shook his head. Fire? No. Has there been a fire? I explained the situation with the cabin to him, deciding to leave out the creature and the chanting for the time being. The cop nodded slowly, his expression remaining largely the same throughout. All right, he said. We'll look into it, and then give you an update in the morning. For tonight, just get a hotel or something. We exchanged numbers, and I thanked him. As I began to walk away, he called out to me. Hey, can I ask you something? I turned back around. Yeah, I said. Sure. Do you happen to be my dad's name, son? For a while, I just stared at him. Eventually, I nodded. Yeah, he said. I thought I recognized you. I don't understand, I told him. I've never seen you before. The cop took a deep breath before taking a quick look around. Come here, he said. Come close. Tentatively, I did so. I can't tell you everything. I don't even know everything. But I think you should have the right to know the truth about your father. All of the stuff that's happened here tonight. All of the shit that you've seen. It has something to do with him. He took another look around before continuing. Cartels, right? Was that the story they told you? It's not so creative, but I guess it doesn't have to be creative to be believable, 'cause the shit that he was actually mixed up in, you would not believe unless you've seen it for yourself. What the hell are you talking about? I asked. Look, I have your number. I'll be in touch tomorrow morning. This is something I'm curious about as well. Maybe you can give me some answers, point me in the right directions, but not here. So get out of here before people start noticing you. And stay safe. I didn't feel like staying in a hotel that night, so I drove back into the city, dropping everybody off before arriving back at my own apartment. Of course, I couldn't sleep that night. My eyes wired open into the morning as I waited for the officer to call. He still hadn't by the time that noon rolled around, and so I tried calling him instead. No answer. Eventually, I did receive a call from the police, telling me that my father's cabin had burned down and that it was due to a forest fire. I told them that wasn't possible because there had been no forest fire, and that I suspected foul play and wanted it to be investigated. "It's already been investigated," are the exact words that the officer told me. "Don't worry about it. Just get in touch with insurance, go over your options." And before I could say anything else, he had hung up on me. It was a mixture of anger and curiosity that compelled me to drive back down there. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but it certainly wasn't for the road leading towards the rest stop to be blocked altogether. There were 2 cop cars guarding the barrier, with a single officer signaling any vehicles approaching to turn around. I pulled over to the side of the road, and after some careful deliberation, I decided to get out and approach him and ask what was going on, just to see what he might say. When I finished the question, he stared at me for a long time. Uncomfortably long. "Emergency construction," is what he eventually told me. After that encounter, I pretty much dropped trying to figure things out. Some weird things have started happening to me since. Every night, I swear I can hear a baby crying in the apartment across from mine. The apartment that I thought had been occupied by a pair of college kids who definitely do not have children. That cop that was supposed to call me finally did, a few nights ago. When I answered, I was met with dead silence on the other end, nearly 30 seconds of it, until the line clicked dead. There's an abandoned house sitting across the street from my apartment building, one that's supposedly been there for years because the development of the store meant to take its place keeps getting delayed. Somebody has started staring at me through its second-floor window. Whenever I catch them doing it, they're quick to close the blinds, so I can never catch any details. But I know that the moment I turn away from it, their eyes are back on me. I can't confirm that any of these things are related. Whether it has anything to do with my father, I just know that I don't want to deal with it and that I want it to end. North Main Woods. This incident was the most terrifying experience of my life. This happened in the fall of 1982 in Baxter State Park, Maine. I lived in Manchester, New Hampshire at the time, and desperately wanted to get one last camping trip in before the weather changed, and the region would become buried in snow and tourists from out of state for the skiing season. It was early November, and it was still warm during the day and nice and chilly at night. Perfect for sitting around the fire and relaxing. I love the outdoors. I still do. But the events of that night in Maine would leave a mark on me for the rest of my life. My wife worked all weekend at the hospital downtown, and both the kids were at Grandma and Grandpa's for the weekend. I called in sick to work, loaded up my Bronco, strapped the canoe on the roof, and hit the interstate. I was on the water late in the afternoon. I loved this area because of how remote it was. I was few miles from my launch site, where the truck was parked, when I spotted a perfect place to camp. I paddled toward the shore. "This is a great spot," I thought to myself. I set up my little tent, built a fire, and unfolded my pack chair to relax. The day turned into night, and I crashed out in the tent. The following day, I awoke to the sounds of birds chirping. It was a little cooler, but still great weather. I took my camera out into the forest to take some pictures. I did some fishing and just enjoyed the peaceful stillness of this remote wilderness. The day was uneventful, and soon after dinner, I lay in my tent with my flashlight reading. I must have dozed off because I awoke startled by something moving outside my tent. I lay still, but instinct told me there was something outside. I could hear the carefully placed steps of something. There are moose and black bear up here. Moose can be very dangerous if you walk upon them by surprise. The bears generally smell you before you see them and keep away. I lay still and listened. Whatever it was had stopped at the entrance flap of the tent. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could make out a faint shadowy shape. I was wide awake now and on full alert. Whatever it was, I could hear it sniffing around and the panting of breath. I slowly began to unzip the tent when it ran off. I unzipped the flap of my tent and looked out just in time to see the branches swaying and hear the sound of something moving through the brush and into the deep woods. The sound of its footfalls told me one important thing. It was on two legs. That couldn't be right. I hadn't seen any other people since entering the park and leaving my truck at the trailhead. The tourist season for leaf peepers had passed. And even so, someone could only reach this location by the waterway. I suppose someone could be out here, someone I hadn't seen or heard until they came sniffing and snorting around my campsite in the middle of the night. I guess it was possible. As the sun rose, I ate my breakfast but remained on guard. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I felt a presence in the forest. Someone or something, just out of sight. I kept a .45 revolver when I camped out here in the North Woods. I wasn't concerned about the wildlife so much as the weirdos you might run across, the meth heads, the backcountry types. In my experience, the scariest thing you can come across when you're alone in the deep woods is another human. I couldn't be sure if someone were out there, but the paranoia had begun to take hold. It was dark now, and I was inside my tent. I kept the revolver close and my boots on. I was done playing games. I sure didn't plan on shooting anyone, but I was damn sure to show them I was no easy target. I sat up quickly. I must have fallen asleep again because I was startled awake by movement all around the tent. The shadows everywhere, on all sides, in all directions. I could hear sniffing and snorting, low grunting, and raspy breathing. What the hell is happening? I thought in a panic. It didn't sound like people, but the height of the shadows cast against the flaps of the tent in the moonlight revealed prominent, upright figures. There must have been 5 or maybe 6 on all sides. Fear gripped me as the realization came over me. I was surrounded. The low growling stared. It was answered back on the other side and all around me. Low, deliberate growling. Were these coyotes? Were the massive shadows just the light playing tricks on me? The growling increased in pitch and intensified, and I knew an attack was imminent. I pulled my revolver and fired straight up in the air. The next moments were a complete blur. I charged through the tent with just the clothes on my back, my .45, and the truck keys in my pocket. I bolted straight for the canoe and muscled it into the water. I jumped in and began paddling. I never looked back until I got far enough from the shore. I should have never looked back. They were standing completely still on the riverbank, their bodies crouched down, with heads low, eyes reflecting in the moonlight. They looked like giant coyotes or maybe even wolves. 6 in total. I was transfixed by what I was seeing. I had never seen a coyote this large, this massive. As I sat in the safety of my little canoe studying these creatures, they did something I will never forget. They began to stand up on their hind legs. Each one would slowly raise to 2 legs. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. They all stood like men. These things, these creatures that had almost ambushed me as their prey. I turned and furiously paddled as the howling rang out behind me. Be warned, there are bad people who live in the woods. Have you guys ever seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Many of you probably have, but for those who haven't, It's your run-of-the-mill slasher horror flick made in the 1970s, I think. Hold on, let me check. Yeah, that's right. 1974. It's considered one of the best horror films ever made. When I first watched it, it seemed to really hit home for me, much more than it did for my brothers when we were younger. I was 11 at the time, and we had sneaked a copy of it into our house from our friend who lent it to us at the time. Now, I would have to say one of my biggest fears is being kidnapped and being surrounded by inbred batshit crazy people. So needless to say, when I saw this, there were more than a few sleepless nights with my light on. But did you know it was based on a true story? Just the thought that there were real, actual lunatics like that in the world just made my stomach churn. But what are the chances that you would ever find yourself in a situation like that? Let me tell you all, and this post will serve as a warning to anyone who thinks that the United States doesn't still have its fair share of crazies. Listen to me right now. There are people out there who live in the woods. There are many of them. And I would bet that there are some that live in your state, and they are possibly the most dangerous and batshit crazy people you will ever encounter. They are not to be tampered with. If they find you on their turf, and God forbid capture you, then you might as well be better dead. When groups of people begin to isolate themselves for a long time, many of whom participate in interbreeding, they become something much more different than a human. Their primal instincts and violent tendencies become amplified, as well as their intelligence and empathy becoming non-existent. So no sleep? I would like to tell you about my most terrifying experience and my first and hopefully last encounter with these people. I will not give any real names or locations on where this occurred, as I fear some of you might get the bright idea of trying to find this place for yourself. So it started over the summer. A few of my friends and I decided we wanted to go on a camping trip. Weird, right? 4 dudes going into the wilderness with no girls and sleeping in tents? Well, we used to do this when we were kids, so it was kind of a nostalgic trip. We hadn't noticed anything when we were teenagers. It would always be an annual night of fun in the outdoors. We would drink, tell stories, laugh, cry, the whole deal. We live relatively close to the woods, so our parents would let us go up, but only once a year. So anyway, back on topic. It had been 5 or 6 years since we last went up there. We all parted our separate ways. When we went to college, we would occasionally all go on Facebook to talk about our lives. So we all finished college, got jobs, and I decided to call them up. I managed to get a hold of 2 friends, and they were both up for it. My other friend moved all the way out to Florida, and he was busy with work and shit, so he couldn't come back to our home state. We brought a bunch of gear and supplies, as well as a couple of other things like beer and food. We were ready to relive our high school days as best friends. We got onto the trail at about 5 p.m. We hiked on the trail, and I swear, it was like we were back in high school. We talked about everything happening in our lives. We were laughing so hard at the college stories, we were practically choking. We finally got to our campgrounds at about 8 p.m. We were all set up by 9 and we lit up the fire and cracked open the beer. We told stories for about 3 hours, and we decided to call it a night. Now, there are many rumors in my area about these people in our area who have been isolated for some time now. We had never seen any sign of them when we were younger, so we had no reason to ever be worried about them. I don't know if they relocated or moved or something. But basically what I'm trying to say is they should have never been there. They should have never known we were there. I woke up in the middle of the night and looked at my phone. It was around 2:30 in the morning, and for some reason I couldn't sleep. For about an hour, I just laid in the tent just staring at nothing. That's when I heard it. Not an it, actually. That's when I heard them. It sounded like a pack of wolves or something walking about our camping grounds. I was already losing my shit at this point, but when I really shit myself was when I realized it didn't sound like animal breathing. The way the steps were moving and the breathing patterns were just too human that there was no way they were animals. I stayed absolutely silent. There was no noise for a brief period, and for a moment, I thought I was just imagining it. Then I heard whispering. All I could make out was, "After we gut them fuckers, who's gonna get their livers?" At this point, my fight or flight instincts kicked in. It was officially go time. I decided that there were too many of them. I swear to God now that I'm remembering it, there must have been a dozen of them at least. I nudged my buddy to wake up. He just turned around and looked at me with eyes that told me, "What the actual fuck?" I put my finger over my mouth and motioned with my hand that we needed to go. He nudged the other friend, and we could clearly hear them talking now. We all stayed absolutely still for 30 seconds, and I took out my Swiss Army knife. I took out my phone for my flash, and I was ready to bolt out there. Then I heard one of them scream, "Them fuckers are awake!" I immediately jumped out of my tent, and I got one good look at all of them with my flash. They were fucking disgusting creatures. Their teeth were all deformed, and their heads were gigantic. Their ears were huge and perked up like dogs. They were all much bigger than us. I would assume they were all around 6'4". We left everything. We completely bolted out of the area as fast as we could. I could hear them all chasing after us for a couple of minutes. My adrenaline was at maximum levels, and I wanted nothing more than to get the fuck out of the woods. I could hear them cackling as they were trying to track us down. After 2 full hours of running downhill, we finally jumped in the car and called the police. We told them everything that happened. Here's what the cops said in response. "You must have had an encounter with the nickname for group of people. They happen frequently in this area. Just don't go back there." What the fuck? I explained to him that they were about to skin us alive, and we left all our shit there. All he could say was, "I'm sorry for your loss, sir, but I would advise you to not go back." I was in complete shock. I have done a lot of research on the group of people the officer told us about after that incident. Some of the stories are horrifying. Many cases of missing men, women, and children, all leading back to this one group of people. The police refuse to infringe this group of people in fear of retaliation. There needs to be stop to this. A lot of nights I keep lying awake in bed thinking about what would have happened had I fallen asleep. I still think about it to this day. It has become very difficult for me to fall asleep after that, knowing that sleep could have let my guard down and gotten me killed. I don't know if you guys have any experiences like this. Feel free to discuss it in the comments. I just needed to get this off my chest. I haven't been the same since then, and I feel like this might add some closure. Have a nice day, everyone.